Hello, I'm Alma Schneider. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and the proud mother of 4 children, one of whom has Prader-Willi syndrome.
And I am Iris Miller. I'm a certified rehabilitation counselor and the proud mother of 2 children, one of whom has quadriplegic cerebral palsy and is nonverbal.
In this podcast, we discuss the uncensored truth about raising children with disabilities.
Prepare to laugh, cry, and hopefully learn something new.
This is Two Moms, No Fluff.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Two Moms, No Fluff, the podcast in which we discuss the uncensored truth about raising kids with disabilities. I'm Iris Miller, and I'm here with my lovely partner, Alma Schneider. Hello, Alma.
Hello, and Dolly, you can see
Dolly.
here. She's like a new baby who doesn't want to get off of me. She's a dog, by the way, if you're just listening to this.
Yes, so this is our distinguished guest for today, is Alma's little puppy. And Alma, do you want to introduce our topic for today?
Yes, absolutely. We are going to venture to speak about puberty, a topic that is often fraught with fear, anxiety, and drama by not only our children, but our parents, caregivers as well. So, talking about discussing this topic, Iris and I, there are a lot of features, a lot of pieces to this puberty discussion. So we're going to try to tackle some of them and prepare some of you who are not there yet and commiserate with those of you who have been there before or are in it now. Do you want to get started, Iris, talking about some issues around puberty?
Yes, I think that for most families, it's maybe the biggest fear of the unknown. It's the period of time in which their child is going to transition into an unknown, unfamiliar adult. And this is scary, I believe, in every family, no matter, if the child has a disability or not. But it's mostly, I think, frightening for us when our children require so much help, attention, and maybe sometimes sympathy. And I'm using sympathy and not empathy here, because for many parents, the fear is that once their child with a disability turns into an adult, they would not receive that same level of sympathy from the community. And that relying on the kindness of other people would be harder when the child is an adult and an adult with a disability. If I can just throw another kind of item into this conversation, is that for many of us, while your child is a child, it's almost easier to carry the burden of ever-growing gap between a typical, I would say, what a typical development would look like in another child and your child with a disability. But once you kind of spring into adulthood, it's almost a given, how a final product of a productive kind of on the neurotypical spectrum, I would say, adult would look like. And for many, many families, it puts a very kind of bright mirror in front of their face, and they are very frightened of, looking at their child in that new perspective.
Yeah, and I'm going to piggyback on that with when children go through puberty. Typically, it's around a growth spurt as well. And if your child is growing in that way, for some kids who have issues, behavioral issues, and they're much bigger, and of kids of color, I'm just going to put it out there, with the police and all of these issues. If you have a little kid running around and being wild, that's one thing. But if you have a 6'2" African-American man dealing in the same way or a similar way, that is very frightening for parents and family members and the community. It can be really, really a very scary time for families that their kids could be in danger from these kind of behaviors because they're now bigger. I want to touch a little bit on, I love how you're talking about the emotional piece of it, Iris, with the the parents and the caregivers. Um, it's there's not much out there for the caregivers during this time, and there really needs to be, because our kids, it's not only thinking about the future and that, okay, this is it, this is how the society is going to treat them differently because they're an adult now. There are all those feelings, but it's also while we're dealing with the kids going through this transition, there are hormones at play, and they can cause all sorts of behaviors that weren't there yet, or behaviors that are exacerbated because of the hormone fluctuations. They even, I read some research also that IQ can change during this time. It can fluctuate, go down, go up. There are all sorts of things that are affected by hormones, physical strength, um, things that are just different from what they were before. And any kind of a change is different, especially, when we all get used to the way our kids are. And then there's any kind of a change, it can be disruptive to everyone's lives. But when you have a child who starts being aggressive when they weren't aggressive before, or more aggressive if they were aggressive before, that can be very, very difficult to deal with. So it's really important to get the proper supports in place if that's going to happen. If it does happen, also I want to mention uh, medications often change during puberty because of the hormones, and the size, kids size may change, so they need to adjust to different medications, and that means going through a trial and error period, which can be very difficult for everyone involved until we find the right new dose if your child is medicated. So there are so many changes that can happen emotionally, physically, societally, with the community seeing our children as adults now. They might not be like, oh, he's so funny, he's so cute. All of a sudden, going over to hug people when you are, 6 feet, and a grown person hugging someone, that might be taken very differently by the community. So that kind of comes along with puberty. And I'll stop there and pass the baton to you, Iris.
Yes, I think as you're sitting there with your puppy, I'm just like, it's almost like what we learned at service dog training, that those little puppies, they grow. I think preparation in advance is the best strategy and the best way to go. I know that for me growing up in Israel, I had access as a child, and I remember my mother reading those toddler books to my younger siblings as well, about the birds and the bees, and how adults change from children to adults, and how this whole process of puberty really happens. And I think it's never too early to start explaining this, whether through books or through a conversation to your children, because we try to prepare our children with disabilities early on for any other life change. And even though this might be a topic that causes us personally maybe an embarrassment or a sense of discomfort, because I think sexuality and going through the changes, of puberty are not very well, I would say, discussed in our society. We want to make sure that we give our children the best preparation that we can. And I think that with that, I always like to remind people, arrow on more understanding rather than less, and take maybe comfort in the fact that maybe you think your child does not get the whole text or the whole message, but maybe pieces of it will penetrate. And as much as you can recite, repeat, and explain, I think you give them a better sense of control over something they have no control of. And I want to mention one book that my kids really liked reading that is in English, because I did bring a bunch of books in Hebrew about the subject, but it's called Hair in Funny Places. And I didn't love that book very much, but my children did like it, and I read it to them when they were, I think, 7 and 3, or like 4 and 8, something like that. And the fact of it was, it kind of explained the whole process of puberty and how a child changes into adult. I think that this gives the kids a little bit of sense of pride over those changes once they come, rather than confusion and shame.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's reminding me that, when you say they're never too young, there's a lot of research that shows that children who have intellectual disabilities and, cerebral palsy even uh, go through puberty early. That there are a lot who go through puberty early, precocious puberty, it's called. And there can be aspects of puberty that come, not all of them, just some features, and rarely all features of puberty. But that's, kind of adding insult to injury. They might not be cognitively ready or emotionally ready at all, and it's coming even sooner than anticipated. So that's something to, be aware of, that it is normal for, it's typical for kids with disabilities to have some features of puberty early. It reminds me of there's a lot of precocious puberty with my son's syndrome. And one of the things was, he had very, very hairy legs. And I remember that people used to comment on it all the time when he was very little. And I just couldn't wait for him to go through puberty so that it would be age appropriate, all the hair on his legs that people could see. So even something like that, who cares? It's leg hair. When you have a child with a disability and you're so accustomed to people staring or asking questions or thinking that something's odd, you don't need one more thing. So it's just, I bring it up because it might not have been such a big deal if my son were, typical and nobody ever had questions about anything, but it kind of adds on to our plate when we have to deal with those kinds of things. Something else that I wanted to bring up was hygiene, that has to do with going through puberty. And I will tell you, having 4 kids growing up and going through puberty and all of their friends coming over, there is a very strong smell that is like nothing you've ever smelled before, when they're going through puberty. And I bring it up because some kids love taking showers and baths. Some kids detest taking showers and baths. And if you have a child who is very resistant to water or, has sensory issues, and it's a real struggle to get them to bathe, and you've kind of been going along with, okay, well, it's not the end of the world if my kid takes a bath every 3 days. It's so hard getting them in there. Once you go through puberty, it's going to be a really big deal to make sure that the kids are clean. And it's a real struggle. It's a real struggle. And, it's important to figure out some strategies to get your child clean, because then you have the issue of not only in your home having smells, but you have issues of people in the community and having your child be further stigmatized. So, one tip I can give you for that is, if your kid is refusing to shower, join your local Y and go in the pool. And if you have to just go in the pool to deal with that, if your child loves swimming, then do that, but you got to think out of the box. I used to have my kids, I would call it a spa day, and get them in the bath, and I would put on different voices to, have them enjoy their bath time. So whatever tricks you can figure out up your sleeve to get kids bathed, that's something you're going to want to start thinking about ahead of time, or having some kind of a reward system for going in the shower or the bath, because it's gonna hit, and it might hit hard, these hygiene issues.
Yes, I want to maybe continue on that thought, speaking more specifically about girls and the menstrual cycle. But before I do that, I want to say that we kind of tend to focus a lot about the maybe physical changes that happen to our children while they go through puberty. But there's a lot of emotional changes as well. And as you mentioned before, this whole kind of hormonal storm that happens, in addition to the development of the prefrontal cortex that happen exactly at that age. We see our children change in front of our eyes, and it's not always easy. And I can tell you that one of the hardest things for us, and again, as a family, it was my daughter having those mood swings, for a long period of time. It was something that really confused her as well. She used to be very kind of happy-go-lucky, and then suddenly she would have those ups and downs and ups and downs, and she herself was very startled by like her strong emotional reactions. So this is something to pay attention to. Usually, I think that there are children out there that their emotional reactions start happening way before any physical reaction to puberty even shows its face. But be a aware and prepared. Understand that this is temporary. That
Mhm.
even if it lasts a year or two, that it can fade away and you can get your calm child back after the storm is over. And it also, I think, is helpful to explain to our children that this is okay. It's a part of the age and stage, and that we in our family have the space for these behaviors and for these reactions, and it's okay, because as much as it is confusing and startling for us adults, it is also for our children.
Yeah, and it's, it can really disrupt the household, for a while. So it's good to laugh about it. Go in the other room with your other kids or your partner and just be like, "Oh boy, puberty's here," and just kind of make a joke out of it. Um, Something else that I wanted to mention is that because a lot of women have, over the last couple of decades, have started having kids later, it often happens that puberty is happening with our children while we are going through perimenopause or menopause. So
Double trouble, Alma,
double
double
trouble,
trouble.
double trouble. So it can, just be aware that this can be something, if you haven't experienced it already. It makes it once again extra hard to deal with the children who are, not themselves, let's say, temporarily, while we're going through mood swings and lack of sleep, which is, sleep deprivation, as we know, is so difficult. And hot flashes and all of these things that are making our lives harder. We're also dealing with the emotional and physical situations with our kids. So that's something to, again, show compassion for yourself. If you lose your temper, you know, make some repairs, talk to your kid that you're having a hard time too, and we need to, get back on the same page. But really validate how hard it is going through these emotional changes and physical changes for both parties.
Yeah, I think I'll go back now to the hygiene portion, talking about girls getting their period. I don't think the period is the right word to use for this.
Menstruation.
Menstruation, yes, thank you. So basically, I believe that for us, let's say as a family, we have a process and procedure right to every activity, especially the activities of daily living, how to bathe, how to shower, how to brush teeth, etc. And this is kind of a new chapter, right? You as a parent don't have best practices to share with the world, because neither you or your child have a best practice yet. So I think that what I kind of recommend as a maybe approach for tackling periods before they start is to create a period kit, and a period kit that is filled with little surprises and gifts for the child, but also has a whole variety of personal hygiene products that basically you allow your child the space and time to try and find what it is that makes them feel most comfortable and most, I guess, in control over the situation, and allow the time and space in the first few times that your child gets their period to kind of experiment with that and to celebrate the event and the occasion, because I think that it's it's a nice reframing of this milestone that some families maybe prefer to hide and keep concealed,
Mhm.
obviously for hygiene purposes, right? We do try to like stay hygienic, but it's also a milestone, and this is maybe for some children one of those things that they can celebrate that is in sync with normal typical development. I hope that we as a family are doing the right thing in terms of giving the event maybe the most positive attention that we can and could do. And I hope that for other children that it becomes something as celebratory as that. And I know that it just it makes it something that is maybe natural and spontaneous into a full-blown celebration.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to point out that with the parents too, there could be a lot of conflicted issues because parents, especially moms, if you're dealing with a daughter who's getting her period, you can it can be a very positive thing. However, if you have a child with a disability who has a period, it might be something that you've been dreading, really dreading, because it's depending on how self-sufficient your daughter is to be able to um, to be able to manage this, because it's every month. It can be very daunting. It can be very messy. And as opposed to feeling like, oh, my daughter is now becoming a woman and having all these, wonderful feelings associated with it, which, some people do have, not everyone. But to then have to worry, oh my gosh, there are lots of things that you have to worry about. Like, is she going to bleed through? Is somebody going to see it in the community? Is, how am I going to deal with this? And it's going to be an invasion of her privacy for me to have to go into her, underpants or her caregivers. Might this lead to some kind of abuse? Like, these are all unfortunate things that moms and dads have to think about, that this is a whole other level of intimacy and lack of privacy, especially for someone who can't express themselves or is non-speaking, um, or cognitively not aware. It could just bring up a lot of issues, around that are based in fear. So it's important to own that, to talk about it with other parents, other community members that you feel safe with, because this is a big deal. I mean, this is not, it might bring up all sorts of issues that, your life might have been going along, smoothly for a while with the kids, and then all of a sudden this happens, and it kind of reminds you, oh boy, we're not like everyone else. We're going to have to tackle this one too. So it's important to be aware of it before it happens and to address it properly, depending on the level of, cognition that your child has, and their ability to be involved in what they want. Because some girls might say, I want a tampon. Some might say, I want a pad. Some might say, I feel more comfortable with a diaper so that I don't even have to worry about it in public in case it goes through. Every child is different, but I think you're right, Iris, having the child be a part of the decision making, if it's at all possible, that will make it a more positive experience.
I think that the fear factor is kind of interesting to me, because I remember, like, now that my child is the child with the disability is 16, we're kind of at the tail end of this experience. It's almost interesting to me how it was even scary, or how was it even a big deal before it happened, because your child is anyway changing all the time, so
Yeah.
it's one more change. It's only maybe the projection of all of those societal expectations and the stigmas that we have pre-imposed on the situation that made it so big. But this is actually an empty balloon that we shouldn't have worried about so much. That being said, we did prepare. We did have maybe, as I mentioned, like a period kit ready years in advance. It was just sitting there. Every time I would learn about a new product, it went into the box. When we
Wow.
saw a nice, toy at the dollar store, it wasn't anything fancy. It went into the box, and it just it's the preparation that made the D-Day special. And I think that also knowledge is power. It's power for you as a parent. It's a powerful thing for your child, to the level that they can understand and maybe comprehend. If you can explain more and give it a little bit more of a positive spin, I think your children would end up looking at everything in a very positive spin. So I hope that we talk about all the complexities of the aging stage, but it can also be a smooth ride, believe it or not, almost.
Yeah, with planning, I'm so impressed with you, Iris, having your period kit years before. Um, and that makes total sense because when you're prepared, everything's going to be better. Two more things that I wanted to bring up. One being gender dysphoria, there, which can happen with neurodiversity, have and other disabilities as well, just like in the neurotypical population. But it's important to be aware that if there is gender dysphoria, that breasts do grow, and there is uh, there are all sorts of other things that happen with muscle tone and all that with muscles and with boys and testosterone, everything that the hormones affect are going to go into full swing in during puberty. So definitely, you are probably going to want to speak to professionals about that, as well as endocrinologists, because if that's a route that you want to take, uh, possibly having stopping your period, you can stop certain aspects of puberty with medication. That is a serious thing. Sometimes they can have long lasting effects, or can be you just want to know what you're getting into if that's happening, and have the proper counseling for it, and meet with doctors who know what they're doing, because that can be very traumatic for a child who is experiencing gender dysphoria. And the other thing I just wanted to mention was, we talked about having menstruation with a girl, but boys also have um, a more increased desire to masturbate. And if, depending on the disability, they might have lack of impulse control and do it in public. That is, again, something that you're going to want to really work with, because if you have a grown man doing that in public, that's going to be very different from a young boy doing that in public. So these, they're daunting topics, but it's something to think about and something to start working on sooner rather than later. That we do this in private. That talking about periods ahead of time. Also talking about nocturnal emissions, which are wet dreams in the vernacular, um, and kids might be ashamed of that if the bedding is soiled. So these are all things you want to talk about with boys as well, to the best of your ability, their ability to receive the information, whatever level you need to discuss this with them is important. Talk to professionals about this, do your research, read up, your child best, the best way to approach them. But it's important because they might be scared about these things that are happening as well, that they might feel like there's something wrong with them. So it is very important to have those safety things put in place about privacy, and not doing certain things out in public, but also things that are happening in private they might be alarmed about as well. So definitely those books, age appropriate, whatever it is, for boys as well as girls, that Iris mentioned. I'm
Yes,
sure we'll have more to talk
exactly.
about on this topic.
Yes, I think there is a lot to still cover. We barely spoke about sexuality, and we're kind of running out of time. So we'll have to probably revisit this topic in more details and depth at another episode. But if you listen to this episode, you have anything else that you want us to focus on a different time, please don't hesitate to write to us at info@2momsnofluff, and we'll be happy to invest more time and energy on specific topics of conversation. Thank you for all of our listeners for joining us today. I really appreciate the time spent with you. Hopefully this was informative and helpful. And if you would like, please give us a 5-star rating so other parents can get exposed to this content, whether it's about puberty or any other topic. We want the people that need the information to find it. Alma and I, know that it wasn't available to us when we were just starting to raise our children. So hopefully we can be helpful to other parents. Alma, any words of advice before we part ways?
Just stay strong. Talk to your community. Talk to your friends. You're not alone. These are
Okay.
tough topics we're talking about. and we can't do it alone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a great week.
For more information, please go to www.twomomsnofluff.com. Thank you.
If you like this podcast, please subscribe and give it a 5-star rating so more people can hear it. Thank you.